Hi, I'm Mark Rutten. Welcome back to Nomad Boatbuilding, and we're back building the 2.4 meter, and today we're going to get started on planking. Now our main area of interest right now is the counter area. Now the counter is everything from the stern post aft. We don't exactly have a proper stern post, but what we do have is a little tiny transom that connects the keelson in the forward portion of the boat to the keelson in the counter. Now I'm going to start the planking between the counter and the forebody right at that little transom. And on our model, we've actually got a little extra material here that is going to be what we're going to call the skeg. Skeg is going to get added later, and that's just because it's going to be a lot easier to build. Right in this area we have so much shape that it's going to be really tricky to deal with. And the skeg is a little portion wherein the counter planking and the skeg planking come together at a right angle. So it makes sense, because that's a right angle, to do this as a separate part. To do that as one part means I have to figure out how to put some structure into that joint, and that's kind of tricky to do. So easier to make that as a separate element. We just pull that away and then we can just glue it in there later on, and that's going to make things easier. So now we're dealing with starting our planking at the point at which that transom starts, and that's where this planking goes from a right angle into actually being a curve. Now this is rather difficult for me to get started on, partially because I'm brand new to cold molding. I've never tried this before, except say on a paddle. While I'm no stranger to trying to force things into oddball shapes, this is the first time I've had to try and create such a large, broad, molded sort of form like this. And so my apologies if I don't get every little detail on camera. Part of it is there's a lot of cussing and swearing going on, and I don't want that on camera. But also there's a very limited space around the boat for me to work. And to have a camera on a tripod set up there can be very obstructive. And also a lot of the time, just because of the physical nature of the job, half the shots are going to be of my back. And so that's not very interesting to look at. Now there's a lot more planking to do on this, so we're going to get some better detailed shots a little bit later on. But my apologies if today's video doesn't show the greatest detail. However, I will do my best to try and impart a little bit of educational material to you, and I hope you enjoy watching the process just the same. Now without further ado, let's go get to work. I already did the other side of the counter here with our first layer of planking. Now I'm onto the port side. Got it down to sort of a bit of a system on this side now, kind of. First side was a total gong show, of course. That kind of thing usually is. Spent way too much time trying to fill in the gaps here with epoxy because they were sort of halfway covered up with my little doodaddies at first, and then I started pulling them off, gooping them up, and then restapling them. So I got to find a better way to deal with that. Trying to find the best way to create some sort of way of bridging my staples when I'm stapling my planks down. So one of the ways I've come across that seems to work pretty good is just using these little coffee stir sticks. To make it a little bit easier to use, I'm just taking a chisel here and just kind of scoring them in a few spots. You can see I just came up with this simple way of ganging them together. And I'm just going to use some furniture wax here, give them a quick little mop down. And when I go to use them, I can staple directly down onto the boat, use the whole stick, and they'll snap away at the spots that I've scored them. So that's just making things a little easier to handle, easier to find a full stick in my pouch here than it is to try and find a little tiny stick. And it's easier to just hold it there, staple it where I think it's going to be about the middle, and then break away the rest. And that seems to be working okay. And the paste wax is making sure that these things don't get glued down to the surface very much. This is a bit tedious. It's kind of job that I kind of tempted to just try and get one of my kids to do, but ultimately they'll want to watch TV while doing it, and then their productivity will slow down to zero. So better to just do it myself. So we got our planking stock here. I'm mopping it down with some water before throwing it in the steam box. The stuff is very light. Usually I don't have to steam yellow cedar very long, but it really depends on how dry it is. This sort of experience really has driven home how much the moisture content affects steaming time. And I already know that, of course, but when I'm doing kayak ribs, for instance, we never steam them for more than maybe 3.5 minutes a piece. And I started out at steaming these at about 5 minutes, and they just were not
yielding very much. So I've gone up to about 8 minutes now, seems to be a good spot. Problem with yellow cedar is if you over steam it, it has a tendency to just sort of fall apart on you. So you gotta find that sweet spot. I think once I get past this counter area, and this is a pretty tight bend here, it's gonna get easy. Everywhere else is pretty easy. So I'm putting tuck tape on the hull, and that's mostly because I'm putting epoxy between these joints. Basically, butt the planks up. There's a little bit of a gap, or I'm back beveling the edge of these a hair so that there is a bit of a gap. Schmuck some epoxy in there just to sort of lock these edges together so that I can pull these fasteners out and fair the whole thing out. And so the tuck tape is really just to make sure that I don't go and inadvertently glue these to the mold, because I don't want to have a huge wrestling match getting this off the mold. So pretty darn straightforward. Drop a piece of tape on there. And I'm just kind of picking away at the taping job here as I've got a moment while things are in the steam box or I don't have anything else to do. Sometimes it's good to have a few little tasks that are just taking up time. Whoa, there we go. There's the bell. Okay, so I'm using a combination of staple gun and little plywood backing blocks for the staples so I don't drive them too deep or drive them through the planking itself. And I'm also using these little clamping cauls with some screws on here, screwing right to the mold. So I'm using these in the areas where the plank really twists hard to try and keep the edges down. Otherwise, I got to put a bazillion staples in there to get it to do the same job. Here we go. And this is smoking hot in here, so just pull this out and give it a feel. Yeah, it feels pretty good. I was feeling for, is it supple enough? Okay, pop it out in place. And some of these are requiring a secondary kind of fitting. In places where my cauls don't reach, I've got little fender washers I'm using. Come on. Using heat. I get this edge down so I can get this bent before the heat goes away. Ah! Come on. This is exactly where you want it. And an apprentice helping you out. Apprentice is mostly that extra pair of hands. Okay, so we're going to re-steam this little plank that sweeps into here. And one thing to understand about steaming is once you've bent something to a particular point, you can almost always bend it back to that point again. So re-steaming something isn't really a huge deal. However, you can over-steam it, so you got to be careful about that. And when you pop something back in for a second steaming, you really don't have to go very long. Maybe, a third to a half of the length of time, as long as it hasn't cooled down too much. I'll try and be more organized this time. You can't reach half your tools if you're not careful. So I'm going to pull this out. Okay, just pop this into place, and boom, boom. Wow, that is really hot now. There we go. I can just sweep that around, use my hip, and once again, not quite ready. I'm trying to not pepper this thing with too many fasteners if I can avoid it. So doing my best to just use these little fender washers more than the staples. That's much better. I really want to try and suck this shape down properly. Ow. I'm just going to squeeze another one right in here, right on the side. The gods are telling me to get some of this crap out of my pocket here, but I can't find anything. Need to have a pocket dedicated to screws, a pocket dedicated to washers. Mostly I just have pockets dedicated to sawdust, it seems. That one full of screws, one full of washers. Longer screws I'm not using so much. Now I've got my next plank. Into the steam box. I almost think I should put the iron on this guy. Feels like I'm sitting a bit proud. So I've got my steam box just kind of spewing all of its extra water out into this bucket. Use that to our advantage. Okay, now if you're going to get into the boat building business, get yourself a couple of cheap irons. Well, at least one. You'll destroy it in no time flat. Kind of wish I had one that was like half this length. There we go. Put pieces of wood in here. A few on the boat. Screws in there, washers in there. Laughing. How's that looking? That a little longer. I think I might pop another screw through there just to try and suck it down. Right there. It's growing a little hump. There we go, that's better. Whether or not that stays there after all is said and done, man, who knows. You do what you can, hope for the best. I'll do a little steaming down here too, just to flatten this out a bit more. So because I'm going to be filling all of these joints with epoxy in order to stabilize all of this, I don't want joinery that's super tight. It'd be nice if it's tight on the inside, and to that end I'm basically beveling it back on one edge on the outside, basically doing the equivalent of a cotton bevel. And then we're essentially caulking it with epoxy. Just settle down there nicely. Nope. And down here at the bottom, this is all going to get trimmed off, so we're just going to staple it right down. Okay, I tried making sort of a bending iron using this old MAP gas can. Welded this piece of plate onto it so I could hold it in a vise, and then I was just dropping the hose into there, trying to use steam to heat this up, but it really was not working at all. It was far too cold to get a good bend. So I've got a new idea, and that's utilizing my steam bending rig for when I do luthier stuff, which is really a tin can with a bunch of zinc wrapped around it just to give it mass. Drops over there, and then there's a couple pieces of wood here that just, squeeze onto that can to keep it isolated. But it gives me a very small working area, way too small for this. So what I'm going to do is try and convert it, drop this can over there, put zinc around this. I'm hoping the extra volume is not a problem. I mean, this thing as it is gets so smoking hot, I kind of worry that I'm going to burn the house down with it as it is. So I think this is going to work pretty good. This is just a 100-watt light bulb in here. My biggest worry is not finding another 100-watt light bulb if I need it down the road. Okay, so a lower tech solution I don't think can be found. So we'll just drop in the light bulb in there. Oh shoot. No! What's that? Ah! Damn it! Been here before. Okay, so I got another one. I think this is a 100-watt. I think it's a halogen filament though. Hopefully it should generate the same kind of heat, I think. Let's bring
I should plug it in first. Just have a quick check. There she goes. Well, it's certainly getting good and hot. That's what we want. All right, well, hopefully that'll do the job. We'll find out. Not bad. So I'm thinking I'm going to use it upright. I hope I have enough clearance here. That's my biggest concern. So, oh boy. One of the things I'm finding constantly frustrating with this project is the fact that I can steam my planks. They need steaming. They're too stiff to bend on cold through the hard spots, but they're light enough that they cool really quickly. So you got to work really fast to get them into place if you want them to really hold their shape. And of course, it's not so simple as clamping at one end and clamping it at the other end, because they take several different turns throughout the course of their path from one spot to the other, and especially through the tuck, it is the most convoluted, twisting, snaking thing I've ever encountered, and I'm really struggling to get it to stay put. And a good example is, I've got this little bend here, which is all well and good, but then it wants to bend like the exact opposite direction, just inches away, and it wants to twist in different directions just as badly. So that's making life really difficult. And as soon as you get it sort of close to fitting, there's always some little corner that doesn't want to lay down properly. And yes, you could throw it all back in the steam box, but as soon as you do, the whole thing just straightens back out again into a floppy noodle, then you're back to trying to wrestle it into this complex shape again on the boat, and it's a back and forth that's just making me scream. Look at that. See, it doesn't look like much, but it's a lot. It's a lot of convoluted twists. Okay, so here's a good example of something that's kind of frustrating. This is a steeler I'm trying to get into place, and I can't get it to sit down properly right here on its own, which ideally I would like it to be doing that. Let's try again. That's a bit better. I'm really trying to not staple directly to the plank, because you got to really work to dig it out. Okay. All right, so here's the plank I was just playing around with, and of course now my little buttons and stuff are all going to make it a bit harder to get this properly fitted. So let me just tack some shims in place here. Another one on down here, like so maybe. Okay. Well, it's going the wrong way. I think I'm going to have to try and find a different way of doing this, because this is really not
working very well. I think I need to be coming from the opposite direction, but I don't know. I mean, so hard to say. It made sense to start here in this end because of the transom here, to work around that first. Okay, so I'm going to try this. Put a hole right in my bend. Okay, sort of it. The problem is that, like, if your plank isn't laying down really fair with the way it is going to attach to the hull, it's like the attitude of it changes drastically, and then, you know, just like push on a little too much here and it swings way that way, too much the other way, and so on. And so trying to figure out exactly what's happening along the way is the hard part. So let's try this. So I get 2 shims there. All right. Inevitably, every time I put in a staple somewhere, one leg breaks off when I try and remove it. And so I'm constantly fishing these tiny little staple legs out of everything. All right, I think we've got it here. Fingers crossed. This is going to work. Oh, no, my pencils are sharp enough. All right, here we go. Okay, I think that's going to work. So now the task is to trim this steeler back, give myself a SIR mark, registration mark, a couple of them there. We'll pop this off, we'll trim it to fit, and it'll be ready to glue in, hopefully. I keep waiting for this whole process to speed up, but it sure isn't doing it today. I think it's one slow, painful step after another. Okay, so here's my line, here's my steeler. Go cut that, and I got something else in the box here, which is the steeler for the other side. So I think I need to go over there and try and figure out exactly what I need to do to make it fit. Got sort of an idea now that I've got these I've switched from putting a screw at both ends of my sticks to putting one right in the middle, so which means I got to drill a hole in my plank, but I think I'm going to try and use these like little lever clamps on the other side. Just need to make sure I have some shims of some sort to shim up the outside edge. Now this one I'd already previously shaped to fit into this spot, so hopefully it will go where I want it to. Come on. Get in there. Oh, that looks better. That is much better. So I'll just pop a couple of staples in here. See, right there, it's not sitting down quite right. See if I can use these screws just on their own without the fender washer. Yeah, actually that works pretty good. Just gonna leave that on until it cools for a bit, and we'll come back. So this is where loosen up on that. Stick a wedge under here and shift that pressure a little bit. Okay, that's a million times more hopeful than what was happening earlier today, so that's good. And I'll go back to the other side and think about getting this fitted on there and ready for being glued in place. Oh, actually now this is in the way, damn it. Ugh. So frustrating.
I want to thank all of my followers on Patreon who make these videos possible. If you'd like to help support these videos, please consider joining us on Patreon. You'll find links in the description or up in the corner. I want a special shout out to my newest patrons, Daniel White, who's been a former customer and a former assistant, and now he's got himself a job in the boat building industry, and he's decided to show his support for this channel by becoming one of my top patrons. I also like to shout out to Oliver Woodcraft. Oliver is another YouTuber and boat builder, and I encourage you to go check out his channel. I'll put a link up in the corner as well. Of course, you can also support me by just subscribing, liking, and sharing these videos. And I thank you all very much for your support in any way you can give it.
Just got this plank steamed on up here, so that's got to cool, and I'll leave it overnight so that it's really properly set. It needed to be dry, of course, before I can glue it in place. And remember that it's only getting glued along the edge seam here right now and up here at the keelson. So I'm just going to scuff this down right now, and I'm going to be moving on to this rest of the planking up forward. And one thing I need to do is I need to add my little transom on here. So I've got this little cedar transom that's going to fit right in here. Glue that in place down here against this planking, fasten it to this keelson, and so this is making the connection between this keelson and that keelson. And then there's of course our skeg that's going to get built on here as a separate component. So I'm going to put that on, and before doing that I just want to make sure that I ferret off the bottom of the counter here. We call this the counter. Anything that's behind the stern post, which we called it, this would be our stern post in this case, running right through, we call that the counter. Anyhow, so I'm just using my longboard with a really good, nice coarse 36 grit paper on here to just try and knock the worst of this off. I'm not going to worry about ferreting it out particularly well right now. I'll wait till later on when I'm doing the whole thing. But just doing what I can to get rid of the gobs of glue and things like that. And if there's any sort of pronounced ridges, I'm just going to put a little bit of effort into trying to knock those back. And then we'll worry about the final fairing at a later point. So just like so. Of course, I should be wearing a mask for doing this, so I'll be putting my mask on to continue with this process.
Alright, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed that. Now don't forget to subscribe and like and share and all that stuff. And if you can help me out on Patreon, I really appreciate that. And you can find links up in the corner or down in the description for all of that stuff. Now, for now, I'll see you later.